And our approach not only focus on problem solving as many other programs do, we actually focus more on problem discovery. So meaning how to define and discover a problem from practice, right? And the idea was really received by students and our industry partners and alumni. So here, let me just start with a picture made by Gartner on the 4 types of analytics, right? From easy to hard, from lower value to higher value, right? So what Gartner is saying is, right, the descriptive analytics, diagnostic analytics, and predictive and prescriptive. So my question to all the professors, what do you teach? Which type of analytics do you teach? So feel free to speak up. Oh, let me guess in the interest of time. By the way, so the left half, which is descriptive and diagnostic, right? Let me see, predictive and prescriptive, yeah, right? So the left 2, more or less, data-driven and about problem discovery, right? Think about descriptive and diagnostic, right? It's to understand what was the problem, right? And use a lot of data. And the right 2 are mostly about, model-driven and problem solving, right? So, and, thank you for the answer. And also that's the same as what I observed. So our teaching is primarily focused on the right 2, right? The predictive and the prescriptive. And the left 2 was, let's say, were almost entirely missing, right, from our teaching. Now, recently, of course, we see more and more this type of teaching coming up, but still, right? Now, the reason being, I think, as Gartner pointed out, right? So people might think that descriptive and diagnostic analytics may be easy and also have lower value, which I'm not sure it's true, because some people, right, thought otherwise. For example, Albert Einstein, right? And he said, if I have an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, on a solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes, right, determining the proper question to ask. Right? For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than five minutes. Okay, so obviously he thinks very different, right? And another quotation by Charles Kettering. He's an American inventor, engineer, and businessman. And he said, a problem well stated is a problem half solved. So clearly some people do not agree with the Gartner's statement, and they think the problem discovery or definition actually is very challenging and important. And so, in my opinion, so after solving and discovering many problems, and also after teaching many these courses for quite a few years, I think problem discovery by descriptive and diagnostic analytics is not only right difficult, but also it's not only valuable but also difficult. It is just difficult, right, in a different way, right? So one of the key challenge, right, of analytics is data interpretation, right? Seeing the same data, what do you see from it? What are secrets behind the data, right? And this is a challenge, as Informs put it, right? That's analytics is transform data into insights, right? So let's say seeing the same number, right, or numbers, right? You may see something. People have different interpretations, right? Some people say 6, and other people say 9, and some people see just a whole bunch of rocks, right? While some other people see a human face gazing at you. Right. So the point is, right, so do we really understand the data? Right. So, okay, let me give you a few examples just to cheer you up. So the first example is a classical one, which is about Compaq versus Dell. I'm sure you heard about it. In year 2001, Compaq was the market leader with the largest market share, and it sold itself, right? Completely abandoned its strong brand. right? Even if you have healthy cash flows and meeting patterns. But the question is why? All right, to answer this question, we need to understand the computer industry background a little bit, right? The computer companies have the same key technologies, right? And same key suppliers, such as CPU and operating systems. And they're competing primarily on customer service and cost structure. So let's look at data. So if we understand the data, right, then we will know why Compaq sold itself. Right? We don't need a lot of data, just a few, right? Let's see, Compaq has a higher gross margin than Dell, right? 23% versus 20%. But Compaq also has higher operating cost over sales, about 14% versus Dell, which is 10%. That's because Dell can better manage inventory, right? Now, if we subtract the cost of goods sold, the operating cost from the gross margin, we find out that Dell outperformed Compaq by 1% in operating margin. And here's the question, right? Why is this 1% so critical that Compaq, the market leader, gave up the competition and sold itself? All right, now, actually, when Compaq sold itself in year 2001, I could not understand it. And I was teaching this case, right, for 5 years. And 5 years later, suddenly, I realized what was going on. So it took me 5 years to figure out the answer. And during that 5 years, I wrote many papers. Right. Go ahead. Do you know why Compaq sold itself? Yeah. So this is the question I ask my students, right? And also, I think this is like a test of business intelligence, right? So, do we really understand these numbers? Right? The number actually has a big secret hiding behind it. Can we see through these numbers? Compaq clearly understand what it means, but HP clearly didn't understand, so we bought Compaq. What is the secret hiding behind this data? Why would Compaq sell itself? Okay, now in the interest of time, let me just give you what I think about. So if you look at the data, right, the gross margin, right, Compaq is 23% and Dell is 20%. Now, there's only two explanations for this difference in gross margin. Either Compaq had a better deal from the suppliers, so that means it has lower cost of goods sold, or Compaq has a higher revenue. It has higher pricing. But think about that, as we said in the previous slide, right? These two companies have the same key technologies and the same key suppliers. So their deals from the suppliers are more or less the same. And their sizes are not too big, not too much different. Right? So given they have the same cost of goods sold percentage-wise, and what explains their difference in gross margin is their pricing. Right? Compaq, in fact, has about 10% higher price than Dell across the board. And here is the secret, right? With a lower pricing, and Dell can make more money. How can Compaq compete? Right? If they lower their price, if Compaq lower their price, Dell can follow it. And always keep it lower and still make more money. So the market is shifting towards Dell, while Dell is still making more money. If this becomes consistent for many years, and there is no hope for Compaq to win. Of course, the condition is that the technologies are the same. There's no other technology breakthrough, so Compaq could actually break out this competition and go to another area. Okay, now you may think this is an old example which happened 30 years ago, but recently we have some other examples, right? And I'm sure you heard about the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSM, was invited right, by the US government to open a new 5-nanometer factory in Arizona. I think that was year 2020. Right, now this news immediately raises a question, right? Do we, that is United States, have the best semiconductor manufacturers in the world? Right, we have Intel, right? We have Micron, we have Texas Instruments, right? We have many other companies, right? Why invite TSM? Right, so, well, actually the following data explains what happens, right? Sorry to drag into this data, but let me explain. So we did a value driver analysis, right? Just correlate operating margin with gross margin, right, for semiconductor manufacturers in the world. That's it. We have the major semiconductor manufacturers, right, for 3 years. And so by this picture, we can see that, right, if you have higher gross margin, usually you'll have a higher operating margin, right, which makes sense. However, if we find a counterexample, such as TSM and Intel, or Compaq versus Dell, right, we will find an extraordinary case, right, in which, if you see here, Intel's gross margins is in a neighborhood of 60%. TSM is below 50%. Now, assuming they have the same supplier, more or less the same, or materials, right? The difference between their gross margins is really driven by their pricing, right? But see, with the higher pricing, Intel is making less money than TSM. Okay, I'm not saying Intel is another Compaq, but what I'm saying is it is not technology, right, that sets them apart. I think Intel has better technology because it invests much more in R&D. I think it is the operating efficiency that sets them apart. Right? That is why the US government was inviting TSM to the United States, because they can produce things cheaper and more effective, more efficiently. Okay, let me give you 2 examples. This is my second example. So the second example is about Airlines. There was a famous quotation by Warren Buffett on Airlines. And he said, the worst sort of business is one that grows rapidly, requires significant capital to engender the growth, and then earns little or no money. And he said, think Airlines. Why did he say that? Well, based on data, right? So if you look at data, in year 2015, the entire airlines, industry for the US had a cost of goods sold about 65%. And that was a good year, and they made about, on average, 15% of net margin. But 1 year later, 2016, the cost of goods sold rose to 70%, and their net income down to 8%. Now, you know what happened in the year 2019, just before the pandemic? The cost of goods sold rose to 75%. Without major, oil price upswing, and their net income down to 7%. Okay, you can understand the pressures they are taking, right, to be profitable. And I'm not showing you the data during the pandemic, which is bloody, right? But if you look carefully inside this industry, not every company is a bad choice for investment, right? If you look at Delta, for example, right? American Airlines is performing not well, but if you look at Southwest and Delta, they had a nice margin, about 10%, right? But they did a good job in different ways. Delta has tight control on the other cost, which includes the interest, right? That means Delta was very good at managing its assets. And Southwest was very good at controlling its cost of goods sold, right? It's lower than the average. Okay, now let me show you one more example, which is healthcare sector, which is also the focused industry of today's conference, right? So in the healthcare sector, which was the hardest industry, right, during pandemic, and it is also heavily criticized for its outsourcing, right? And the resulting supply disruptions. We all experience, right? Some of the raw materials, the medicines, or some of the medical equipments, right? Or missing or disrupted, and which may cause a lot of problems. But the industry also has, has a reason to outsource because of cost reduction, right? So let's find out if that is true or not. So we specifically check, excuse me, compare two industry groups within the healthcare industry. The first is healthcare equipment and services, right? That is the companies manufacturing healthcare equipments and also the hospitals and providing the services. Right. Compare this with pharmaceutical, biotech, and life sciences, which are essentially the drug makers. And you can see these two industry groups have very different cost structure. They are looking like a complete, two different industries, right? So they should have different industry business models. Right now, if you look at the healthcare equipment and services, the cost of goods sold for United States on average about 61%, and the sales general administrative cost is about 10% or 9%, and their average net margin is about 3%. So this industry, right, is very similar to a classical manufacturing or transportation industry, right, with huge spendings on cost of goods sold. So I understand it makes sense here to outsource overseas, let's say, for lower cost of goods sold, right? So which were because the cost of goods sold is such a high portion of the total revenue, right? But if you look at pharmaceuticals or biotech and life sciences, it is a completely different story, right? The cost of goods sold is about 32%, right? And the sales general administrative cost is 26%. It's almost as high as the cost of goods sold. And their their net income is about 10%. Okay, so let's say if we outsource, raw materials, right, to overseas, in this industry, it might help us reduce the cost of goods sold, but in the meantime, it's going to increase the sales general and administrative expenses, right? Because these two expenses are quite close to each other, right? The cost of goods sold and the SGA. And so you don't really know how much savings you're going to get, right? It's likely that you may not get any savings at all, right? Now, that's this insight is more evident if we look further into the pharmaceutical industry, right? Let's look at biotech versus pharmaceuticals, right? For biotech, the cost of goods sold is only about 18%, while the sales general administrative expenses is 33%. Right. So now for biotech, if you say you're going to outsource for lower cost of goods sold, which is only 18% of the revenue, but you're going to increase, right, the sales general administrative expenses, which is 33%. I'm not sure if you're going to break even or not, right? But for sure, you're going to bring more risk or disruptions in supply chain. Right? Okay, so so let me give just the overview of the map of the things that we think important for practice and what we're teaching in the courses. So I hope you get an idea of how to use descriptive and diagnostic analytics for problem definition, right? For problem discoveries, and we develop a wealth of modules, teaching modules, right? To discover and solve problems in various supply chain domains, such as sourcing, right, make, move, sell, and integration. So, for example, we have the competitive intelligence and benchmarking, right? Essentially, we're using benchmarking to compare, companies in the same industry to help companies identify their weakness and strengths, identify and also discover problems and their root causes. Right now, we have the demand forecasting planning for pandemic under influenza. Pandemic influenza and the flu vaccines. Right, and that is predictive. Right, we have sales operation planning based on coach logistic network expansion, and we make the whole formulation is so simple, then you can input in Excel and solve it in 1 second. Right, and we used diagnostic and descriptive analytics, right, to help a company here in New Jersey to reduce their inventories from $2 billion to $1 billion. Right, and okay, we also use primarily descriptive analytics, right, for inventories to discover problems in inventories, right? So rather than jumping to inventory models such as Yoko and US vendor, we actually started out by asking the question: is inventory important to you? Right? The inventory may not even be important to every industry. For example, the banks have no inventories, right? And also, does inventory really affect your financial performance, right? And finally, do you really have an inventory problem? Right? Maybe you are already operating at optimal, such as just like Amazon, right? And so there's very little room for you for further improvements. So data can help you do all these kind of things, right? You just descriptive and diagnostic, and also, right, sourcing analytics. A company spend a lot of money and buying from thousands of suppliers, many things, right? It's extremely data intensive, and there's a huge opportunity in getting value, right, from sourcing by using descriptive or diagnostic analytics, right? For example, we had a case on Apple's iPhone, how to source the CPUs and processors, how to identify the right suppliers, right, for high-tech components. And in addition to these data-driven modules, we have 2 games, such as the Hunger Game to simulate supply chain shortages and rationing, and also a flour game to simulate international fresh flour supply chain for students to learn supply chain contracts and collaboration. Okay, now how much more time do I have? Let me see the time. Oh, so I have 15 minutes left. So let me ask the audience. I don't have time to cover all of them, but maybe 1 or 2. What do you think? What do you want to listen? Secondly, I will have until 2:45. Sourcing analytics. Okay, great. Distribution analytics. Okay. All right, I'll try to cover both, but I'm not sure. I only have 15 minutes, but I'll give you a heads up. Okay, now let me just. So let me start with sourcing and then talk about distribution. Sourcing, let me see where I have. Okay, here we go. Okay, sourcing analytics. That's a great pick. Okay, so I have maybe if I don't finish everything, I will talk a little bit more after the break. Okay, sourcing analytics. Let me start by motivating a little bit. So there's essentially 2 kinds of problems in sourcing analytics. So first thing is how to identify and select new suppliers. And this is what we call the sourcing intelligence, right? Because new suppliers and new products emerge constantly, and there will be also corporate changes, such as merger and acquisition or bankruptcy and so on. So a big company tends to frequently adjust their supply base. And so that's why they have to do this exercise, right, at least once several months. And another kind class of problem is, right, suppose you already have a large base of suppliers, right? How do we rationalize and manage the existing suppliers, right? Which we'll call supply management, right? Because you may spend millions of dollars and you may source from hundreds or thousands of suppliers, about hundreds of thousands of SKUs, right? So there are essentially 4 issues here, but I will focus on maybe just these 2, right? So it's really all about analytics. Think about the huge data you have to deal with. Right here, let me just focus on the sourcing intelligence, essentially to identify and select suppliers, right? So the first thing you have to do is to understand company's needs, right? And also determining these selection criteria, right? What do you need, right? You mean the lower cost, or you need higher quality, right? Or you need responsiveness, right? All kinds of things, right? So we'll get down to that a little bit later. And then understand what you need. Then you need to analyze the supply market to identify the right suppliers and their offerings, right? I'll get down to this. And also, you want to support better negotiation and bargaining with the suppliers, right? Because you want to understand their cost structure, their bottom line, right? And who has them have the leverage, right? Is that you have leverage, or your supplier have the leverage? You can understand that, right? So that's why we say here it consists of three analysis, which first is market intelligence, understand the market, in the competition intensity, things like that, and you do the supplier analysis, and you do the bargaining power analysis, right? Everything, all of this can be quantified based on your data. All right, let me just use the example, right? Here's iPhone's global supply chain. Apple made a huge amount of money from iPhone, right? And the gross margin on iPhone is 56%, right? And Apple is not making anything; everything is completely outsourced, right? And Samsung actually play an important role in the supply base, right? However, right? Okay, now Apple is taking 56% of the entire pie, and Korea profit, that is Samsung, only 4.7%, and Chinese neighbor, which is assembly, is about only 1.8%. Okay, now Korea, the Samsung clearly are not satisfied with this 4.7%, so they actually came downstream and compete and become a major competitor to Apple. So that it was Apple's dilemma, right? Should I continue to use Samsung, or should I use somebody else, right? The question is, how do we continue success? Because sourcing is actually an important factor for the success of iPhone, right? So what Apple have to do for every generation of iPhone is to identify and select new suppliers for critical components, such as CPU and processor, right, or flash or memories. Now here, let's focus on the processors. And after some analysis here, let me skip all the details, right? So Apple essentially have to do like a competitive analysis about itself, compare Apple versus the other, major manufacturers in the technology sector. And first, Apple would have to. So these are the criteria for selecting a CPU supplier, right? So first of all, the supplier has to be innovative and technologically and engineering capable. Of course, have the or be able to make that processor, right? And second, it has enough manufacturing capability and also high quality, right? These are about capability. And second, about cost, right? So the supplier has to offer Apple a good price. Okay, so Apple can keep its high margins, right? So despite that good price, right, the supplier has to be profitable. Otherwise, the supplier won't be able to sustain, right? So think about this. They need a supplier that offers a lower price, and also, if despite that lower price, be very profitable. This is a very restrictive requirement, and hopefully you can find one. And also, the supplier, hopefully, the supplier do not have much bargaining power as Apple. And in terms of continuity, right, the supplier has to be financially healthy, robust, right? It won't bankrupt in the near future, for example, and also has to be reliable and flexible and responsive. That is, if Apple suddenly increases production or demands, the supplier can meet that demand, right? Can deliver on time. And finally, it's about leaks and competition. So the supplier won't come downstream and compete with Apple, or won't leak the sensitive information. Right. Okay. So now, where do we find the CPU supplier or semiconductor supplier around the world? So let's look at the map, right? And I put the company's information on the map for each country. So we can see that global suppliers for semiconductors year 2020, and the United States clearly has the highest revenue, right, in the semiconductor industry, which is followed by China, Japan, and okay, it's better actually to see by the bar chart, right? So US is the ideal place to find a supplier in semiconductor, and then it's Taiwan, right? Which is, although it's a tiny place, but it actually ranked number 2nd in the world, and China follows that, and then we have Korea, and Japan, and Germany, and Switzerland, and so on. So that's for maybe focus on United States, Taiwan, and Korea for well-known reasons. And we have also look at the growth, right? In addition to the total revenue by country, we can say that Taiwan and Korea not only have the largest revenue, right, from semiconductor, but they also have the highest growth, right? Especially Taiwan and you know. And so let's pick companies from Taiwan, from Korea, from United States, right? So here, Intel is clearly a great choice. It has highest revenue from all these countries, right? From US, Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. And then we have the second one is the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, right? That's what Sarita was talking about, right? TSM, right? Which actually is quite big. It's more than half of Intel. And then we have Qualcomm. We're looking at CPU, not memory, okay? And then we can pick some other companies, maybe Micron and so on. But let's pick Global Foundries because it's a smaller supplier, represents diversity, right? So of course you can pick whatever you like. Now we can do a bargain power analysis. So the question is, right, what is my leverage, right? And who has the bargain power, right? Hopefully I have more leverage than my suppliers. And so here we actually have, so we can quantify the average, right? And to calculate price and bargain power index, right? Here, I'm sorry, it's quite a deeper analysis. So I would not get into the details, but the idea is to really to measure your buying power versus the suppliers, supplying power, right? It's essentially you will say how unique the suppliers. How unique is that supplier and how much buying power you have, right? So there are certain ways to measure it. It depends on the data, of course, the buying data. Now, if you're interested, I can send you the details. It's a few more slides, but it takes quite some time. But here, the point is we can measure. We don't need much data, right? But with that data, we can measure the bargaining power of your bargaining power and your supplier's bargaining power. Now so after you measure that bargaining power, you can come down to supplier analysis, right? Essentially, you want to find out if the supplier has lower price and also be profitable, right? And if you how financially healthy your suppliers. You want your suppliers to be long-term, right? You don't want them to be bankrupt, right? And also you want your supplier to be efficient, to be flexible, right? Because if they're efficient, they can help you reduce the cost. If they're flexible and reliable, they can supply you on time. Right. So here actually I skip all the details. So let me see if I can find out something. I just want to show you maybe one or two. So I skip all the details. Okay. It's all quantitative analysis. So after this quantitative analysis, you can find out TSM actually is excellent in terms of innovation. Manufacturing capability also excellent because it has the highest assets in factory and in physical equipment at factories. Right, pricing is also excellent because it has the lowest cost of gross margin, but it has the highest net margin. So that was amazing, right? So this company has the highest net margin, but meanwhile the lowest gross margin, right, among these companies. That's unbelievable. Now, and it's financially is very, very robust. It also has the lowest liabilities and the highest inventory turnover. So very, very efficient, right? Intel is also a great choice. It's technologically innovative. So in that regard, I think it's better than TSM. Manufacturing capability is also good, but its physical assets not as high as TSM. Profitability excellent, and the only thing may not be good is its bargaining power, Oh, am I out of time? Yes, I can share with everybody about this. It's just the bargaining power is not, Apple does not have so much bargaining power with Intel, because of Intel's high, dominance in this domain. And financially, it's robust. The issue with Qualcomm is, right, Qualcomm has very little assets in manufacturing plants, right? That is only good. It's not excellent, and also it has the highest. I'm sorry, in terms of bargaining power, it has highest gross margin. So that means it has highest pricing, and profitability is very good, but it fluctuates, right? If you look at the data, I didn't show you here, it fluctuates over time, right? Actually, it was, and also if you look at the financial health, it's long-term, it has the highest long-term debts, right, as compared to other manufacturers. Okay, just briefly, and so the conclusion would be, let me just go to there. The suggestion would be select TSM as the main suppliers and cultivating Global Foundry as a potential supplier. And by the way, Global Foundry has the highest percentage of assets in manufacturing capabilities, right? Although it's losing money, but it's because it invests heavily to expand its operations. So I think it's worthwhile to cultivating this company as a new supplier, to spread some work to other suppliers such as Intel, Qualcomm, and Samsung for their specialties. You know what? This is almost exactly what Apple did in year 2020. Okay, that's about sourcing analytics and just on time. All right. Okay, so let me continue. Just one more, then we'll have the next speaker coming up. Because he gets COVID, so he like to delay a little bit. Meanwhile, if you have any questions or not only about this presentation, but also about the other presentations by George, by Shreda or Jeanette, please bring it up. I think the next one is I will roughly talk about, okay, here, distribution analytics, right? Distribution. This one. Okay. Oh, sorry. Right. Let me see. Okay, good. So, all right. So now we'll talk about briefly about distribution analytics. So this actually is based on real life case we had that almost 10 years ago. It's about it actually made a transition in the entire wireless phone industry. So a major US wireless carrier, which is Verizon, okay, changed its distribution model from store to showroom and saved about $1 billion in inventory. Now, so what they used to do is, they sell the phones in the store. They have a huge back room with tons of inventories, and you can just go to the store and pick up the phone you like and take it away. But that one proves to be too expensive, especially from the inventory perspective. So eventually, after 1 year, they changed, right, from this store model to a showroom model. Essentially, they break down the back room, right, put all the phones on the show, but without inventories, right? And if you can go there playing and experience the phones, but if you want to order, if you want to buy, you have to order, and they are going to deliver to you directly from their DCs, right, distribution centers, and the next day. So what they were thinking is, are they going to do this or not? What is the trade-off? Right. So this is a case actually integrates the transportation, inventory, warehouse fulfillment decisions. Actually, it's the integrated distribution analysis. Right. So you have to consider not only inventories but also transportation or shipping, right? Also warehouse fulfillment, because the cost is going to change, right, if you make this transition. And okay, so a little bit industry analysis from studying to start with, right? The industry, all these things happened around year 2010. If you look at if you look at right the market or the industry at that time, you can see a sharp slowdown of the industry in terms of the total revenue and also the total subscribers, right? From 2006 to 2010, right? There were double digits growth in terms of revenue and subscribers. And in year 2010, it's only 2 or 3%. So the market is saturated. So it was becoming from, it was a growth market, right? Heavy growth, and now it becomes a saturated market in which right, the business model has to change to efficiency, right? In a saturated market, if you want to gain more market share, the only thing you can do is to grab it from somebody else, right? So how to do that? Well, you have to be more competitive. You have to have a lower cost structure, right? Lower pricing, right? You have to, right? This is a completely different model, right? And Vasta, which is right a company we work with, at that time had an inventory turnover about 28 times a year. And after they make the transition, they become 64. Okay, and annually they have to store about $300 million of phones because just for free, because they have tons of obsolete inventories in their back rooms. Right, so this company has a nationwide distribution network with 3 distribution centers and more than 2,000 stores and about 70 SKUs. And so the scope and scale of this problem is huge. And we have tons of data, right? All the stores, 1 year of data for inventories and sales from almost every store. So that's a huge amount of data, but don't be scared. Actually, we just need some descriptive and diagnostic analytics to actually solve this problem. Right? So the objective is to go from push to pull. Right? Push means stores, you push inventory to the front of the demand. Right? Pull is pull the inventory back to the DCs and convert the stores to showrooms. Right? Okay, these two models. And just think briefly, right, about the trade-offs. Right? If you go with store, the benefits is customer satisfaction, right? Customer immediately get, the phone, and also you can also save picking cost of warehouse fulfillment cost because you are shipping to retailers, to the stores, right, in hundreds, right? And also it's batch shipping, so you save on picking, save on shipping. But the cons is that you gotta have deal with significant inventory investment, and inventory obsoletes very quickly. Right, the shelf life is the life cycle is about half a year or even a few months. Right, there's a high risk of obsolescence. Right, the pull is right. The benefits is the contrary. Right, you get significant savings on inventory, almost 50%. Right, and you also can switch. Have a faster switch to latest phones, but it's going to cost you in terms of shipping, in terms of warehouse fulfillment, and customers will have to wait, right? So the the trade-off is you are trading off shipping, picking, customer satisfaction with inventories and new product introduction, right? Now, it's not that clear which phone, right, you should do what, right? But sometimes if you look at let's say the high volume, inexpensive phones, the high volume and inexpensive phones, it's obvious that we should do push, right? Because inventory is not that expensive. However, shipping is high because you have to ship a lot, right? So, and on the other hand, the expensive, right, and lower volume phones, right, is the opposite case. We should use pull, right? Because inventory is very expensive. You don't have a lot. So you have to carry a lot of safety stock, right? And plus it's lower volume, so shipping is not very high. Now, if these two are very clear, but the other two is not so clear, right? So how about, right, inexpensive but lower volume phones versus expensive but high volume phones like iPhone, right? So all of this, you have to really use data analytics, right? You have to do the descriptive or diagnostic to find out what is the best strategy. You compare two strategies. Right? So let me skip the details. So we look at their inventory data, we look at the sales data to come up with these savings. What we find out is for the hot and feature phone, that is the fast selling but lower but inexpensive phones, right? If you move from push to pull, actually you're going to lose money. Meaning push actually is a better choice as our intuition told us, right? However, for the other three, right, it is actually quite beneficial to use to convert the model from push to pull. In fact, from the cold smartphone, which is expensive phones, but with lower volume, we can save about 77% in terms of total cost. And if we put the percentage into dollar value per store, if we convert everybody, all the phones, right, we are looking at $29,000, right, saving per week. Okay, and so about 32% of the savings per store. And so the story is in year 2001, this company implemented the pull strategy for all the phones, right, regardless. And inventories goes from $2 billion, it was $2 billion, and now it's down to $1 billion. And soon after, all the other US wireless carriers follow the same idea. So now it's very hard to find a store where you can just get a phone, unless it's the cheapest phone, right? Mostly it's just a showroom. Okay. So this is the story about the analytics of, obviously I didn't show you all the technical details, but you get the idea. Right, so let's come back. Right, so anything, let's see, how much time do I have? Oh, I have about 20 minutes. And anything else you want to listen to? Let me see. Oh, I can share the slides. If you email me, I put my email in the chat box. Anything else you want to see? So we talk about sourcing analytics. We talk about distribution analytics. So, or we can just open up discussion with Shweta, with George, and Jeanette. So actually, I have a question for Shweta, George, and Jeanette. How important is data analytics to a business school, in a business school?
Yeah, you must be joking there, Yao.
I'm joking. Yes, I'm asking a very clear question.
Employers are really looking for people who are trained. It's not in the tools. So I think the feedback from the interviews I'm getting are the students say, "Oh, I wish I had learned this. I wish I had learned that." But they're more interested in tools for the undergraduates. So there are two populations, right? Undergraduate and masters. The masters are more focused on applications in problem domains. So the accountancy folks want their training because they have specific problems they're trying. Then fintech people want their own training. So they are looking for very specific training out there, right? So I think what is happening probably is we have to recognize that our undergraduates are getting several jobs. Like our IS major, right? We used to get 130, 140. Now it has gone up to 600 plus. Wow. Many of them double majoring with the other majors. So your finance IS, accounting IS, marketing IS. So, but I think that's the undergraduate side. The master's side, the demand is there. I mean, there's no question there is a huge demand, but they are asking specific domains now, like supply chain or healthcare or finance or accountancy. But marketing, a big consumer. I don't know others what you're seeing, but our number of majors went up from about 400 to 900, and we are still struggling to handle that part of it. It's important, right? But one more, I think, change he did, just to share with you. 6, 7 years ago, there was a committee which formed, and they said all business school majors, undergrads, have to take 2 courses on analytics. And they insisted, yeah, they have to take 2 core courses. And the accountancy folks very correctly, I think they read the signs, and they wanted us to use Python to teach the second course. So their interest was that they must learn a little bit of coding, a little bit of, all the tools. Now there's a debate whether they should code or not code. So all the low coding is, I don't know how it is with your end. There's some confusion whether the business school students need to learn how to code, or do they need to do less coding. That seems to be the big question right now. And let the CS people do the coding.
Sure, that coding is a little too hard, I think, it's not for us, of course, but it's I saw students response when I try to teach them like Python or something. Many of them really, in business school, everybody likes to talk about analytics, but very few people like to learn coding. And that's just so contradictory, right? You think about that.
No, but you got to push them. Because here is the bet I'm making, that the open source languages will take over Excel and all. So I'm slowly shifting away from Excel. And everything I'm doing in Excel, I said, I teach them in Excel and said, now go look at the open source. It's become so powerful. Yes, George, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead, but finish it. I'm going to counter it. Go ahead.
Yeah, but that's where the power really is, right? I'm putting all my models in my GitHub location, and the students seem to like it. So they want to pick up tools. Because the employers are pushing. It's not whether the student wants to learn. You want this 120,000 job, or you want the $60,000 job, right? That's the question. I mean, that's the gap between the salaries.
So with the master's programs coming in, masters in business analytics, even in the business schools, I think students are willing to learn Python and anything else that you throw at them, and they see the value for it. So I teach a course online. I started teaching master's courses only a year ago. Before that, I was only teaching the PhD courses. Because we were fast launching an online program in global supply chain, Annabelle asked me to teach a course on supply chain management. I teach retrospective analysis, retrospective optimization, and using primarily Excel. And they find it extremely useful. And they come back and say, oh, I was able to do the kind of things that you were teaching us, collect the data from my company, and then I ran a retrospective analysis on it. Oh, we are now able to do better. Because it's the simplest thing that you can teach them, and they definitely are going to find the benefit of it. I'll guarantee you that. Because essentially asking the question, what is that I could have done better? If it is scheduling, you're going to do pairwise interchange, play with it, and you can always find a way to improve what you're doing. If it is inventory control, you're going to say that, oh, maybe I should have done this, and why don't I try this? So I find that they're learning to play with the data. I don't teach formula. If you take my course on supply chain management, I don't give you the formula that I talked about for inventory, because that's totally useless. But if you teach them how to work with the data that they have, either the data that is relevant, but they don't have it, so they learn the idea of transfer learning. All the data that they are coming along, I think it's extremely valuable. And I see that online because 2 weeks later they come and say, oh, Professor Shantakumar, we were able to use this idea. But okay, so I think business analytics is very important.
Is there a way to teach analytics without coding?
So that's why I said I teach them on the Excel. Excel is a little bit easy. And every consulting project that I did before we spend maybe $200,000, $300,000 of developing a user-friendly software, I first implement it on Excel, pass it on to the company. They play with it. They are very happy with it. And they also see that it works. So Excel is the medium that I use. It may be changing, like Sridhar says, but I still, my current consulting, the people that I'm working with are both very good at Excel, and they are better than me in Python. So I'm seeing that shift. Even in companies, people are beginning to play with Python much more. But it's much easier for me to teach in the business school using Excel. Unless, because not all the students are trained in Python.
Right.
So just to tell you, yeah, one of our most popular master's course is Big Data Infrastructure, BDI.
Oh.
Yeah. How
So what do you cover there?
Yeah, AWS platform, how do you deploy it and all that? Because that's what is getting them jobs. So the students are smart, right? So we started with 20 students. Now we got 2 sections. Now we are adding 3rd section. So 180 students, right? It's masters. Yeah, it's practical. I have a feeling all this cloud thing and open software has made things very interested. I mean, like simulation we can do. MIT's open platform. You got national labs providing you optimization software free. And then Google's Colab. Google's Colab has made deployment easy for students. I don't spend a dime. The other problem with Excel is, I'm sorry, there are Mac users in the audience. Big problem with Macs. Okay. Half the software doesn't work on Macs. I don't know.
So one of the audience asked about inventory analytics. Maybe you can show that just for 5 minutes.
Sure.
So it's a new way of teaching inventory. So before we get into the models, right? The inventory models, actually, we use a lot of time to motivate the study, right? So here is the way to motivate it. In some sense, you have used a lot of data to motivate it, right? So here in the inventory analytics, this module, we essentially answer the following 3 questions, right? For example, the first question is, for which industry is inventory important? So essentially tell the students, is inventory important to your industry or company or not, right? For some industries, it's not important, but maybe for you, it's very important, right? The second question is, how may inventory drive a company's financial performance, right? Is it really, does it really matter, right? If you manage inventory well, right? And finally, we ask, how do I know if I have an inventory problem, right? Now, why do I ask this question? That's because your company maybe already manage inventory at optimal, right? There's very little room for further improvements, or maybe your performance is really, really bad. So that's really an important question, right? So to answer these questions, you have to use a lot of data. And there's no way to answer this without data, right? So let's just look at, a simple example. Let's look at the United States, year 2019. And let's look at inventory versus total assets. I think that's the best way to answer the question, right? Is inventory important to your industry or not? So you look at inventory versus total assets, right? What's that percentage, right? Now, by looking at a couple of industries here, such as capital goods, automobile, consumer durables, retail, right, food, and banks, including software and so on, semiconductor, real estate, so on. You're gonna find out that for United States, right, for banks, you don't have to worry about inventory at all. So if your students in the banks, don't talk about inventories because it's irrelevant, right? Software services, there's very little inventories. And real estate, very little inventories, right? They don't, they build a house, they sell it immediately. They don't carry inventories. But if you look at automobile and components, they have a huge amount of inventory, right? And consumer durables and apparel, these are the manufacturers. They also have a lot of inventory, 23%. That's the median. And retailing, 24%, the median, right? And could go as high as 44%, right? Let's say a company's assets, 44% of the assets in inventory. Of course, inventory is very important, right? Now, if you look at consumer durable and apparel, it could go up to 73%. That's the 90th percentile, right? And so on. So now things are, but this is just for United States. If you look at different country, the picture could be very different, right? Let's look at another country just as a benchmark, right? Let's say China, the same year, the same industries, right? Let's look at inventory versus total assets, right? If you go through these numbers, just look at the median, you'll find out many of them are quite similar, right? For example, banks, banks in China has no inventory, right? Software service has only, 5%, which is quite minimal. So they don't have to worry about inventories. However, there's one major difference. If you look at real estate in China, remember in US, this number is 0.1. And so it's 0.01. In China, it's 35%. So for US, it's 1%. For China, it's 35%. So 35% of the assets is in inventory for real estate in China. Now, the others are similar, such as durables, consumer durables, apparel, and retailing, and so on. So you see, there's similarities, there's also quite some difference, right? And what that means is, right, for US, the most inventory intensive industry, that is also the industry that, we should teach inventory management to, right, is retailing, right? On average, 85 days, 24% of assets in inventory. In China, it's different. It's real estate, right? 35% of assets is inventory, which is about 1,300 days. Right now, these are the difference. The similarity is for food and staple retailing, for consumer durables and apparel, right? But for both countries, they are very, very high. Okay. Right, right. I'm not talking about cash even as inventories. We're talking about physical inventories, which you actually need a warehouse to store. Okay, now that's the first question, right? So once we see the data, we know immediately, right? Should we teach inventory in this industry or not? Right? Does inventory matter or not? Right? So, and then we can look at the second question, right? How may inventory drive a company's financial performance? Right? You spend a lot of time improving inventories. Would that actually have an impact on your company's bottom line, right? So for US retailing, it does, right? This US retailing. Let's just look at S&P 500 companies. Otherwise, the picture is too messy. So we see that for different years, right? And there's a strong correlation between inventory turnover and sales general administrative cost, or in some sense, the operating cost. Right, so as inventory turnover increases, right, the SGA cost actually decrease in all the years at the same slope. Right. Now we can also see a kind of strong correlation between inventory turnover and asset turnover. Right, for US retailing, because their assets is, right, their large amount of assets is the inventory. Right, that makes sense. Okay, now I want to say is that for different industries or even different countries, right? You plot the same graph, you may not find the same, you may not find a strong correlation, right? It's everything is case dependent, right? Or country dependent. Finally, how do I know if I have an inventory problem? Right? Let me just give you this simple statement. Actually, I collected from one of my customers. Right? It says if my inventory is half of yours, but I hold the same amount of inventory as you do, oops, then I must have an inventory problem, right? So My sales is only half of yours, but I hold the same amount of inventories, right? I must have a problem. Okay. Now, so now to do this, you compare all different industries, right? Rank them up by inventory dates. Let's say for the same industry, let's say US retailing, only for S&P 500 companies, you'll find out Amazon is the most efficient, has the least, I'm sorry, the least inventory dates, the smallest inventory dates, about maybe 35 days. Right? If you look at Nordstrom, if you look at Tiffany, or if you look at Macy's is at 120 days. Right? So you tell me, if they are in the exact same business, right? One company has 35 days, the other one has 120 days inventories, right? So you tell me which one do you have an inventory problem or not? Right? It's very obvious. So the point is, benchmarking or using data, just the financial data, you can do a lot of things. You can answer a huge amount of questions, right? Okay, that's it.